Welcome back to the Masters of Modern. I'm your host, Alex Kessler, here with a co-host that has not been on the podcast before, but you may recognize him if you've been interacting with the MMcast Twitter account recently, or if you've stumbled upon the up-and-coming, firing all cylinders MMcast TikTok account. Rene, welcome. I think this is your first time. I've been on your podcast. This is the first time you're on the actual MMcast.
Yes, I have. Thank you for having me. But yes, this is the first time on the podcast. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you very much. And yeah, you were on the podcast, on the Half Step Down podcast, COVID years. So I can't even tell you when it was, but it was some time ago. But that was fun. We had a good time.
Way back in 2020, 17 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so you've been doing a lot of work to kind of help us grow the MMcast TikTok account as like its own separate existence, as well as the Instagram, and kind of reposting stuff over the last few months, which has been really, really great. And we wanted to have kind of a conversation about, you brought up that Reed Duke recently kind of did a content video, and he mentioned that there just isn't a lot of time right now to brew in modern, and what does that look like, and why is that, and what's the benefit from it. So I think today we're going to be talking about, for people joining, the concept of is modern a brewer's, we used to pretty much espouse regularly that modern was a brewer's paradise. Is that true still? Is there room for modern the brew? Has Modern Horizons decided that it's too difficult to dominate? Have tournaments become too infrequent? So we're going to be talking about that today. Before I do that, Rene, where can, other than through our accounts, where's the best place people can find you on the internet? What are some of the stuff you're doing?
So you can follow me on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram at Rene the Great, Rene _ Great, because Rene the Great was taken. And yeah, so I was an intern at Kess with Alex, and I actually met you, Alex, through my girlfriend Shay. For most of you, probably know her more than they know me, which is Adelana Blossoms all over the internet. So as of right now, I am currently doing the MMcast. I do a lot of the marketing stuff that you guys see on TikTok. I do a lot of the video editing on TikTok, and I post a lot of stuff on Instagram. I chat with you on Twitter. Sometimes I like to ask questions to kind of open up the forum a little bit, to kind of get people interested, until we chat there. So that's where you can find me. I'm also probably the most interesting about me, though, is that I'm actually legally blind. I have no light perception in my right eye, and in my left eye, I see about 30-40%. But obviously, I'm working through it, and it's been a lot of fun getting to know Alex and everybody here at the podcast, and Ben and Marshall and everybody. It's been a lot of fun, and I really enjoy it. And yeah, so that's where you find me. And I also have a podcast, which is the Half Step Down podcast. We run on a hiatus for quite some time. Life gets in the way. But over the next 2-3 weeks, we'll be jumping back on. It's Half Step Down. You can find us on any podcast platform, even on YouTube. You can find us, just search Half Step Down on anywhere you get your podcast. And we talk about a lot of pop culture, most specifically punk rock, a lot of things, how they intertwine with each other. And yeah, so that's what we do. And I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And just real quick adverts. This podcast is brought to you by MTG Summit. So we're all going to the Magic Summit in, not we all, but at least me and Ben are going to the MTG Summit. I don't know if Rene is going.
Not sure yet. Still kind of penciling. I'm getting married, so we gotta figure that out.
Yep. Which obviously, congratulations.
Thank you.
Which I said to you in the past, but now everyone in the comments say congratulations. Now I'll know if you listen to the ad part. But if you use the code KESS, KESS, you'll get a discount on attendance to the MTG Summit event, and we'll be there doing a bunch of cool stuff. So we're excited to see everyone there. Also, make sure to check out Channel Fireball and TCGplayer.com. Both stores, if you use the code, the MMcast at Channel Fireball, or if on TCG Player you use the affiliate link below, you get a small discount as well. Plus, they send Love Hour away, which we really appreciate. And of course, thank you to all of our patrons, who are the people that are making this happen. And with your help, you can make this podcast continue to happen. If you check out patreon.com, you get access to early podcast releases. You get the raw all non-edited version of the podcast early, about almost 7 days early every week. You also get the extended edition, so you'll get about 20 minutes of extra content each episode, most often front loaded at the beginning of the podcast, where we talk about a bunch of cool stuff. Today we talked about a little bit of TikTok and how that kind of that functions, a little bit of One Piece, a little bit of what's the most published author of all time. Ends up that R.L. Stine has 300 books that he's written, which is a wild number.
Yep.
So definitely make sure to check that out on Patreon. And then we also have a cool Patreon announcement happening probably in the next episode, or the next episode that Ben and me are both on, which we're really excited by. And it's a partnership with Alter Sleeves, which you can also use the code the MMcast for. But wait till that announcement happens, because there's spicy stuff happening. All right, this episode, brewing. So the one thing that so one of the other things that, beyond just your statement about a statement Reed Duke made about how it being and I do want to let you tell that story originally. There's also the Twitter account at MTG Nosferatu posted earlier today, basically kind of the concept that one of the things hurting competitive play is also just a lack of focus. There's now too many formats between the 4 different formats that get focused on RCQ and main competitive events on Arena, plus Standard, Pioneer, and Modern, and even to some extent Legacy in paper, and how the RCQ system is kind of forcing people to play each of them at different times of the year. You could go to one RCQ in January that's Modern, and the next week you have to have a Pioneer deck, and the next week you have to have the Standard deck, and how that has also created this onus for people to kind of stay within safe mainstay decks that they understand versus brewing. And so I want first talk about how what Reed said and kind of your thoughts on what it means. Is Modern a place that you can brew still?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was some time ago. This had to have been probably sometime late last year, but it always kind of resonated in my mind. So the idea was, I was watching. He was doing some sort of gameplay video with some Modern deck. I think it was a Jund Shadow list or a Grixis Shadow list. But in the middle, while he was explaining how the deck worked, he was kind of mentioning how he wished he would spend a little more time brewing. He goes, "I wish I can brew a little more, do whatever it is that he wanted to do." But because of the fact that he plays Standard, Pioneer, Modern, now these other formats, it's a lot harder for him to brew. For example, like Inspiring Spike would normally really dedicate his time to Modern. That's where he's most, where he usually focuses his brewing skills at. And then right under a little bit after that, you hear Reed Duke say, "But I just like winning. Like I just like winning too much. That brewing is it's always kind of difficult, right? Because there's no median there anymore." And I feel that the format has grown to a position of efficiency where 1 and 2 drops are the most efficient cards that you can play in Modern, where 3 drops in some way, shape, or form is always harder to brew with, right? And even if you do try to brew with something, you're going to have more than likely your elementals, right? You're going to have the fight for elementals in some way, shape, or form. You'll probably have your Ragavans, your Renin 6. There's not really a lot of room to brew. And what I always thought about the beauty of Modern is the fact that you're able to, the card pool is so vast that you should have an opportunity to kind of delve into it. But I think because a lot of the internet is dedicated to what the meta looks like, it's always hard to stay away from that, because then you always have those those ideas of thinking, well, why wouldn't I just play Fury? Why wouldn't I just play Solitude over these 3 cards, right? And so I think that's something within itself. So maybe Modern Horizons does have a really big thing to do with it, but it's just, I think that the format needs to kind of figure out a way, well, not just the format, but I think players and brewers need to figure out a way to kind of open up the meta a little bit. Maybe not even open up the meta, but kind of just let it kind of breathe a little bit and figure out ways to come up with some cool ideas, because I have some cool ideas too, but it just never, I have these awesome ideas, and then I put it together. I go to my LGS, I lose, and instead of working on it, I'm just like, all right, I'm going to go back to Amulet Titan, sort of thing.
Right. Well, I think that's like something the podcast has always been a big proponent of, is, not asking the question, why doesn't this see play, or why shouldn't this card see play, and more looking at the question as, how could this see play? Now, that's gotten us into trouble, specifically in the fact that there were times where we did 4 episodes straight of the same set review looking at War of the Spark and Modern Horizons 1, where we could talk about any card and talk about how could this see play. You're able to evaluate cards and come up with new ideas and creativity a lot better if you accept that any card could do well. That's obviously not true on a holistic level, but there are many strategies that have been considered bad that have become winning strategies in Modern, that just because the right person found the right tools to make it work. An example being, of course, classically Amulet Titan, which is now one of the best decks in the format over Modern's history. Another one being Lantern Control. But even stuff like Grinding Station and Merfolk, two decks that are doing really well. And I think Merfolk has become a real player in the Modern metagame at the moment. And the amount of times I've had a conversation where people call Merfolk trash and say that deck could do anything. So I think like there's just an attitude, and it's been interesting also seeing that like play out in the CDH community as well. And nowadays, where that's become a much more popular place that these type of competitive conversations happen, where like the classic conversation around strategies is that strategy's bad. You're not playing a real deck, right? Like you shouldn't do that. And it's always been the benefit, I think, of the players that will do the best to not act that way. And it's been proven time and time to be true to like look at the format holistically and try new stuff out, because you might be finding ways to hit the metagame differently than people would expect.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the biggest component on the idea that tier 2 decks or tier 3 decks are in some way, shape, or form trash is because what you see on the internet is based on what people are playing on the internet, right? For example, if you go to an RCQ, my LGS, when I went to go compete at the Modern RCQ, I wasn't sure what to expect, right? Because at the time when you look at the meta page, you're like, okay, you're going to see a lot of 4-color Omnath, you're going to see a lot of blue-red tempo, you're going to see a lot of this, you're going to see a lot of that. At my LGS, what we saw a lot of was a lot of Amulet Titan. There was 2 or 3 Amulet Titan players. There was a lot of Tron players. You had one guy playing Infect. Only one person played blue-red tempo. Only 2 or 3 people played 4-color Omnath, right? So the idea that the format is the format is actually shrinking, it's, in my opinion, is actually false. I think with the ability to like brew in any way, shape, or form and figure out ways to kind of mitigate that meta actually kind of opens up the format, right? It's kind of like my complaint. It's kind of like for people who follow me on Twitter and Alex, I think you and I are very big fans of Companions, right? More specifically in Commander, we're fans of Companions. And the argument that I always have in Companions is that people say it, or even with budget brewing, like I like to brew budget decks at times, is the idea that you actually have the ability to open up your card pool when you give yourself a specific limit, right? So, for example, with Karuga, I don't know if you remember, but there was quite a time where I was trying to figure out who am I going to pair Karuga with? Who am I going to pair with Karuga with? When you start to add companions to the format, to your deck building idea, it actually opens up your card pool, because you're like, oh, well, I would have never thought of playing Brinelin in any way, shape, or form, right? Because that's an 8 mana trash card, right? But so that kind of opens up in that same aspect. If you open that up in Modern, for example, Night of the Reliquary is still a really good card. It's just unfortunate that it has been pushed out because the game has become so efficient, and maybe I'm not willing to brew with it, right? Like I had this idea of playing Slogurk with Night of the Reliquary, but then you think about 2, 3 3 mana value cards in one deck just doesn't seem efficient anymore. But
sure,
if you don't try to do that, if you don't try to kind of overhit that barrier, we're never going to find out, right? So I think that's why I think it's important that we kind of open up the meta a little bit, try to break through the meta in some way.
Well, and what I would say kind of, and going back to your paper versus online metagame report, paper Magic has always been very different than online. And it's because in paper Magic, it's the cards you own and the decks you've built over time that you're going to see a lot more at a local level. And even in a Grand Prix level, like the amount of Grand Prix I used to play at where I would like, I'm metagame testing. Here are the top 10 decks. I'm going to play 30 games against each deck with my deck, and I'm going to get the best at all of those decks. Hell yeah. And then I don't have any buys because, that's the life I was living. The West Coast didn't have many tournaments available. Nope. And so the first 2 rounds play against weird off the wall brews that I had no plan against. And it was like, oh, I guess I've lost. Right. Tron is a deck that wasn't in the top 8 on MTG Goldfish or whatever the comparable website back then was. I guess I'm out of luck. And when you go to a local game store, you shouldn't expect like, oh, just because blue red is in the is the number one, is 10% of the metagame on MTG Goldfish. That does not mean that in your local game store it's going to be that 10%. And so in some ways, I think that's one of the reasons Jund does better once you exit the online world versus online data, because Jund is classically, and now closer, maybe Rakdos mid-range, is classically the like, this is good against everyone. It's not great against anyone, but it's decent. I'm going to Thoughtseize people, and most decks need to work through that, unless you're Tron. And I'm hoping to dodge my Tron matchups. So, like,
but when you're
I
in
think,
paper, you're more than likely going to face Tron pretty often than not, because that's been around for quite some
because it's one of the
time.
least expensive decks you can play for. Yeah. And that's why maybe you should play just like Amulet Titan, because then you can just stomp on people stumbling. But on the other hand, I do think online offers an easier ability to brew on the other hand, because the investment to brew online is a lot less expensive, right? If you don't already have a fully built collection, building new decks costs money. And if you're building on Moto, though, a Mana Trader's account lets you basically build any deck you want for an extended period of time, or just the cards are a lot less expensive on Moto. So like the balance between what happens online and what people are willing to try out to find success versus in paper, which is what players just are able to afford to own in real life, I think are very two different forces that both do allow, as we get back to paper Magic, people to brew more and come up with cool ideas. I mean, even looking right now on recent 5.0 lists, there's a 5.0 Crabvine deck that like, I haven't seen a Crabvine deck 5.0 an event in Modern in maybe 4 years, which is like really sick. And right below it, there's a Dredge deck, and not on top of that, like as far as like the metagame changing, the Indomitable Creativity deck 4 months ago was not a deck. Like people are talking about it as a cool thing you could do, but it definitely wasn't over 5% of the metagame like it is now. But now, because Lurrus is gone and the metagame is shifting, stuff like that and Grinding Station are both seeing a lot more play, where before they weren't really a feature of the metagame because what they were doing wasn't as good as stuff with Lurrus in the deck, or they were being punished by decks that were just stronger than them.
I definitely agree with you, but if you look at most deck lists, you notice that a lot of the cards being played are being played in other decks, right? So, like if you look at the Indomitable Creativity deck, that's playing Archons, right? Because Archon of Cruelty is just a bonkers card. If you look at the Reanimator version, the shell, it always played Archon of Cruelty because it was just bonkers card. So I guess the argument that I'm making, or not the argument, but just what I'm trying to say is that what if we try to pull away from what we feel is tier and meta, and find a card in this vast card pool that we have in Modern, and try to exploit that, right? But I think that also goes back to the conversation of having Modern Horizons 1 and 2 in the format. But of course, that's a different conversation. We've had that conversation who knows how many times, right? But if you pull something like that out of the equation, and you go back to, let's say, Night of the Wallachori, because I love that card, and Slowgurk, and you play a bunch of Cycle Lands. Maybe there's a way I can build this deck that way. But it's unfortunate that in some ways, whether you're playing online or paper Magic, you're going to see a lot of the same cards. And I think that might be detrimental to the format in some way, shape, or form. But it should be able. We should still be able to have an opportunity to brew what we want, and then possibly make it better, right? And the more you play it, the more you'll be able to do it. But again, I'm also part of the problem too, right? Because in a way, like I said, I built that Bant Lands deck, and instead of trying to make it better, I just gave up. So maybe it's because it kind of fits half and half, right? Like you don't know if you want to win or if you want to brew. It's one or the other.
But I think there's like the point with like the example you're using, right? The Slowgurk cycle, Life from the Loam, Night of the Reliquary deck, which is at this point too slow. Like I mean the Crabvine deck is a great example of that. You could just be a card away from being printed where that deck's good, right? Like and or there could be a piece of tech that you're missing. Maybe you're leaning too hard in Loam, and you actually should just be playing Collected Company and not even worry about that, and take advantage of the fact that the best type of deck that has multiple 3-drop creatures can play Collected Company to its greatest strength, because you're getting the 2-mana advantage by casting into those. Or the fact that 3-drops often play very well with noble hierarch.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And Llanowar elf variants because or
Mhm.
birds of paradise where you can and on top of that, now the reliquary is one of the best things to find Gavany townships with to be able to then pump up that army. So there is, I think, ways to take advantage of those cards that could be interesting, and it could literally just be the right land being printed or the right 2-drop being printed that kind of combines those pieces of the strategy together. And sometimes, which sucks, the cards like Slogurk maybe just aren't good enough, right? Like
Yeah.
there is a point where just like I don't know if Slogurk was good enough before Modern Horizons 1 was
Sure.
printed, right? I don't
Yeah.
know if the printing of these elementals is really the problem there. There was an argument for a long time that a sorcery speed anything for 3 or more mana was unplayable up until the point that Splinter Twin was banned. So I think it's hard to really say, has the format gotten more toxic towards that type of card, or do just the power of 3-drops need to be more explosive in Modern basically from its onset? Now the Reliquary has seen play even recently, but that has been off of the back of the combo with it, right? Like there are combo decks that can go infinite with the Knight of the Reliquary and the land that has landfall, or the enchantment that has landfall that lets you untap Knight of the Reliquary and go through your whole deck. I'm forgetting what it's called. It's on the
Oh,
screen.
yes. That card. That's a good
That
one.
one right there.
Yes, that one right there. Oh my god, what's the name of that card? Yeah.
Now it has a mustache. They put a mustache on it. That's
Oh,
weird.
right on.
Looks
Right
great
on.
though.
Okay.
Honestly, just rocking
Okay.
the mustache.
Should have to put some glasses on that card too, see what it looks like.
Well, now I don't know who it is. Now it's a mystery character.
Yes.
It's got a fake nose and sunglasses.
Yeah.
This is wild. That card, I knew what that card was called, but now that there's a fake mustache and sunglasses and nose on it, I no longer know what it's called. This is
Yeah.
weird.
Can we put a hat on it too?
So now there's a trench coat.
Now there's a trench coat. Yeah. Now it just became Silent Bob from Jay and Silent Bob without the mustache.
Are there 3 of them in a trench coat? Are there now 3 cards all
Yes.
with mustaches stacked
and it's
on a trench coat?
And it's Slogurk, Knight of the Reliquary, and then that one card that we're talking about.
Yeah. They're all the children stacked together.
Yeah. I think this clip will go on TikTok, and I'm going to make that happen.
Yeah, you. If Marshall doesn't and Rick don't edit these together, it's up to you. Make sure to follow the TikTok account to see that animation. If Marshall and Rick didn't do it, I think Marshall and Rick should do it though.
That would be wonderful.
They'll still be on TikTok.
Yeah.
I guess like my point has always been in Modern. You should feel free to brew because it doesn't mean your brew should be viable. Right? I think that's something that sometimes people misconstrue or saying.
Sure,
I'm not saying that like any deck can make it because I don't. That's obviously not true, right?
Yeah.
You're like 4 Colossal Dreadmaw, 4 of the Illusion Colossal Dreadmaw for Modern Horizons deck isn't gonna be viable in Modern. As sick as that deck sounds.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But that doesn't mean that every deck that is viable in Modern has been found. And you won't be able to find that gem, that Lantern Control, that Crab Vine, that Grinding Station deck, that Indomitable Creativity deck without trying stuff. I mean, last week we did I did an episode on my own. Please give me any passes needed. I may have said too many times. Going over 5 decks in Modern that are all brand new or really interesting style decks that are being brought to the format. We talked about a Calibrated Blast deck that is, one that's been around but has never perfectly done well in the metagame, but does this really cool thing. We talked about an Infect list that made a comeback and like was doing really well. There's both old strategies like some of the ones we've mentioned, like Infect, like Dredgevine, that like had the pieces forever to be close to viable, and with the right metagame shift, the right cards being good, the right cards being bad, have a chance to making a comeback, or just like the right technology. And there's brand new strategies that just like that's where literally Lantern Control did not exist as a deck. And then Zach Elsick top 16 with it after a bunch of people on Reddit and him brewed it together. And then he came on the podcast and said, "This is the best deck in Modern. Every other deck is trash." And we were like, okay, sure. And a week later, won the next Grand Prix and now works at Wizards and does a lot of great work for them. So like, there's always a chance. Amulet Titan's the same piece, where it's like kind of a meme deck. People are like, oh yeah, sometimes it can win on turn one. Most of the time it loses. And then someone was like, no, this deck can win on turn two, and it's consistent, and like proved it, got to the top, got 2 copies of it to the top 8 of a pro tour. And so I do think there's always a chance for technology to change or ideas to change. Even famously Death Shadow is a deck that was worse until a card was banned out from under it, and then them having to find new tech that was worse than Gitaxian Probe, being Thoughtseize, proved to them that, oh, we should just not be an all-in version of the deck, and just Death Shadow is the best Delver in the format. And now this deck's the best deck this deck is the best deck in the format. There were no new cards printed into it. It just like the temptation of the explosiveness of giving it double strike was so high that no one was willing to take a step back and be like, oh, what if I just put that in a tempo shell?
So my question to you is, piggybacking on what you said earlier about how the meta can shift, right? Based on technology, based on cards, based on designs of new cards that are coming out. So let's just say nothing new is being printed for the next couple months, right? Do you think that the meta can shift?
I mean, we're already 17 days into the Brothers War preview season, and then our preview card for Throne of Eldraine, or the Wilds of Eldraine, came out last week on our WhatsApp account. Go follow us on WhatsApp.
Let's just say
it never stops, Rene.
Let's just say that preview seasons don't exist right now. Let's just say the Brothers War and on. Let's say we're getting a new set.
It feels so free. This is a weird world. Is this what the sun feels like?
This is what it feels like when you're not looking at Magic cards 24/7 because you're spoilers. Yeah. So let's say the Brothers War and on for the next 2-3. Let's say the Brothers War gets pushed back till, let's say that comes out in February, right? So now you have this huge amount of time.
Walks out, snaps her fingers. Yes. No new Magic cards.
No new Magic cards. So
then we get no new ones for a 3-month period of time.
Yes. So let's say that within those 3 months, the meta has been kind of growing into it kind of stale, right? So do you feel that with what's in the format now, you're able to kind of figure out a way to break that meta and widen out the format with what's available now? Or do you feel that the power creep is real, right? But with the power creep existing and kind of growing as new sets come out, do you feel like we need to wait for something new to make Knight of the Reliquary viable again, right? Or to make fairies viable again?
I don't. I mean, the of the decks I mentioned, the only deck on the list that has a new cards from Dominaria that has really changed it from a deck that couldn't shake it in the top 30 decks to moving it to the top 30 decks is Merfolk. Right? Yes. Grinding Station didn't get a new deck. Honestly, Amulet Titan didn't get a new card. Indomitable Creativity, no new cards from Dominaria. The only one is Merfolk, which, like, thank God, I'm here for Merfolk being good. I'm not complaining.
Yeah,
but
of course.
And like the Grabvine deck I mentioned, no new card. The Dredge deck that was just below it, no new card added to it from Dominaria. It just, the meta game shifted to the right place. People aren't playing nearly as much powerful graveyard hate because there's not many decks in the format that are good out of the graveyard like they were when Luris was around.
Sure.
And so it's now a format that's a little bit more manageable for those styles of decks. And that I think it is always been true of Modern is Modern. I mean, ironically, Modern has had 4, and I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to start listing them out, and I'm going to remember ones that were also broken. But I'm going to say Modern has had 4 broken moments, the 4 seasons, if you will, right?
Sure.
We had Eldrazi Winter, we had Delve Fall, we had Hogak Summer, and we had a Spring, an Oko. Well, I guess Oko Fall.
Yeah, Oko was in the fall.
Oko Fall. I'm going to say, actually, we all called it Eldrazi Winter, but if we want to be honest about actual times of year, it was Oko Fall, it was Delve Winter, it was Eldrazi Spring, and it was Hogak Summer. those are our 4 broken moments. I'm sticking to it. That's my hot take for the episode. Eldrazi is a spring deck. It's not a winter. It looks good in in pinks and purples.
There you go.
Look at Ulamog and tell me he's a fall. That Ulamog is a spring if I've ever seen one.
Absolutely. Yeah. If anything, Kozilek would probably be the one that kind of seems like a fall kind of guy.
I don't know. He's very rainbow. He's got flower things going on. I'm like, he's got the stars coming out. He's coming out of the ground like a flower blooming. They're all spring. Eldrazi
all
are
of them.
And they
Wow.
and their original show, they showed up in spring. The original Rise of the Eldrazi, a spring set.
That's right. It was a spring set.
You know, that's my hot take of the episode.
That's when Wizards was giving out pre-release promos, and it was Emrakul.
Yeah,
that's when they were giving out Wormcoils and Emrakuls as promos.
When a Wormcoil was the promo for
Scars of Mirrodin,
and then which was 3 months later. But back to my point, one of the most broken of those 4 was Delve. You know, the Delve season where Treasure Cruise, Dig Through Time, Jeskai Ascendancy, Birthing Pod decks were all dominant until they all got banned right before the Modern Pro Tour that was just after the release of Fate Reforged and Pro Tour Fate Reforged, and that's the end of Birthing Pod. But that the 2 GPs just before that Pro Tour were 2 of the most diverse top 8s you've ever seen in a GP tournament. There was exactly 8 different decks in both of them. And now, if you look at the tournaments at large, the combination of Delve was definitely degenerate, and I understood why the decisions were made, and they got rid of Birthing Pod because they felt that, you know, if we banned these cards, it just put Birthing Pod in a position that this would be the best deck in the format. There's your history lesson of how Delve spells were banned. But even in that, the metagame was shifting, right? That was a solved metagame that had 3 to 4 months between product releases being added to Modern. You had from September to March. And even then, the metagame of Modern, with some of the most broken cards ever printed, Treasure Cruise, modern metagame continued to shift throughout that period of time. And so I think, like, if you were to do that now, we would see the same case. If anything, one thing that I think might happen, and maybe this is to kind of one of the thesis statements of the episode, the hyper product release of what's going right now is almost hurting the ability for people to look at the metagame and come up with new answers for it and shift it away from Hammer Time, Murktide, Omnath, Cascade, right? Like the 4 pillars of the format. And that's because the metagame is shifting, or so many new cards are being added that people are taking time just seeing which new cards work in the established decks, not even getting a chance to look at what strategies are hiding in the wings that we can brew to make it work in this format. I'm spending too much time thinking, okay, what level of decks does Ledger Shredder work in? What level of decks do different Dominaria United cards work in? To like think of like, oh, this whole other deck strategy, Lantern's back, baby. This deck works now. I can play this instead. You know, like there's no right now. There's not really a way. There's not time to figure that out. Yeah.
So there, I think that the format can, as you said, right, history has shown that it can easily adjust to whatever is being played, right? Once you start to ban things, right, the format kind of writes itself. Now,
I'm not. Sorry, I wasn't saying banning was needed to happen. I was pointing at there was a 4-month period of time where even with some of the most cards that needed to be banned before the Pro Tour, the format itself actually did not stagnate. It rotated around those cards as this format rotates around the Elementals and Renin 6 and Ragavan. But that doesn't mean there's not a ton of different decks that are viable seeing play that are good against those strategies.
Sure. Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah,
new decks are being created regularly or found to be viable regularly, both then and now. And then I did the whole thing about how the fact that more sets are coming out make it harder to blah blah blah.
Of course. Yeah. Sorry, I there was a lot of information that I was trying to absorb. I was trying to absorb most of it. But so by that standard, so do you feel with the expansions of all these cards, right? The card pool is only going to get bigger and bigger as we move forward. Do you think that there's any deck out there that you can remember that with maybe just one card, one extra push, kind of like what happened with Merfolk, right? Which is great. One extra push to kind of make some of these other decks a little more viable in the format? Or do you think do you still think that we're kind of a step behind a little bit on the idea of like, oh, maybe let's try to make this happen again? Because again,
No,
like if you take a look at
I
like
think
Crabvine and all that stuff, like you're not getting a lot of those like those numbers. Yeah, I mean they do 5-0 every once in a while, but maybe that's because the format's not ready for it. But do you think that there's a deck that will kind of a deck that'll kind of grow into it with more cards being released?
I think there's tons of strategies that if the right card is being printed can make it viable or not. And there's also strategies that don't even exist, right? Wizards can print the right combo of cards.
Sure.
Look at Splinter Twin, right? Like
Yeah.
obviously Modern didn't exist yet, but before Splinter Twin existed, Kiki Jiki plus Pestermite wasn't a thing people were trying to do in extended. But you add Splinter Twin to the conversation and Deceiver Exarch, and now you're talking about one of the most powerful creature combos to ever be printed to eventually need to be banned. It's very easy, Wizards, especially going to Brothers War. We could get a bunch of like things to be looking out for. Artifact cards are going to be being printed in very powerful ways for the rest of this year, right? We're going to Brothers War, which is a war of artificers, and the Dawn of Phyrexia. We're then going to the Plane of Phyrexia, which will be very artifact focused, and then we're going to 2 sets that will be a war with Phyrexia. So expect your artifact strategies to get benefits throughout the year.
Lantern Control's coming back. Calling it now. Hey, I called it last time. We're double masters with Twitter. Remember that when I did? I kept saying that Seasoned Pyromancer and Force of Negation was going to reprint it, and everybody said it wasn't going to happen. And then lo and behold, they both got printed at the same time. They spoiled them. Lantern Control.
No, I mean we're here for the shot calls. And then
I'm calling it Lantern Control. I'm gonna be 3 for 3.
Lantern Control will top 8 a major tournament in Modern this year. Is the shot call?
We're doing it. I'm gonna go 3 for 3
shot
this
call.
year.
If I'm gonna point out one thing, it's the fact that both a Crabvine and a Dredgevine list did well. Both 5-0ing is a sign that right now graveyard strategies are viable. Right, I think that's to me more than anything is that the people have had to lessen their graveyard hate for other strategies, which allows those decks to do well right now. And so if I was to enter a Magic tournament, I would look at those types of strategies to see what is actually viable right now, seeing that they might be a good place to start. But yeah, I think like literally, as you said, Lantern can get new cards, but like weird stuff, right? Amulet is a card that was in Modern forever that everyone didn't realize was busted with bounce lands or whatever. So like literally any card can be printed anytime. The world doesn't know unless you're at Wizards, and even then they probably don't know what cards are going to be the most important for Modern moving forward. I don't even think they thought Ledger Shredder was going to be a Modern staple.
Yeah.
Right? I thought they thought
because I think Ledger Shredder was a card that I think maybe Wizards assumed like by design. It's like, oh, this is a solid standard card. But I mean, the waves that it's made in other formats, most specifically Modern, has been bonkers, right? Like it's just been it's just been very bonkers. Yeah.
So like that's kind of the point, right? Who knows? And like look at Merfolk, right? If you had asked what's the card that make Merfolk viable in Modern, I don't even know if I think a week ago I would have not a week ago, a month and a half ago, I'd be like, I don't think one card does it. I think you need a much more significant way to do it. But then they printed Voldaren Hexcatcher, a flash lord that has a counterspell attached and has the ability to turn your other Merfolk into counterspells.
Yeah.
And there you go. There's the card you need.
Yeah,
figured
that's
it
the
out.
card that you needed. Yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah. But do you feel like there's some format? Do you feel like there's some decks that don't need another piece? Because I know Michael always says that that he doesn't want Amulet Titan to have new pieces, and I think Tron is kind of that same way. But I feel like Tron, in some ways,
Tron's going to get a ton of pieces.
I think it's going to get I think it's going to get one big piece that's going to make it viable again. It's still viable now, right? It's in the it's a tier 1 deck. 2%
of the metagame. Yeah. I think Tron's going to get a cool piece or two to be able to play with. I don't know if they're going to be that much better than what Tron's already doing.
Yeah.
But like I think like I pointed to Dredge. I don't think Dredge is going to get very many new cards, and I think it's more viable now than it's been in years.
Yeah.
I think that like literally just it's the goblins could get a new goblin that makes it viable. I mean, there's a 5-0 list right here for goblins to begin with. You could have, you know, it like that's kind of the point. Like a new card being printed
Mhm.
opens up any strategy. It
Yeah.
could be a brand new strat. It could be such a powerful broken card. Look at Through the Breach, not Through the Breach. Sorry.
Underworld
Look
Breach.
at Underworld Breach,
Yeah.
right? Like Underworld Breach has opened up entire concepts of what decks can be that
Sure.
previously weren't viable.
Sure.
And so just Wizards can print an insane, like Wizards can print any insane card. There's so
Sure.
many things that could happen.
Yeah.
Now,
And it's so interesting that, for example, a card like Otherworldly Gaze that was printed in Innistrad last season, a year ago, and with the banning of Luris, kind of opens up the format for Dredge, right? Because people aren't prepared for something like that. So I guess I'm kind of backtracking my own statement, because after talking to you and listening to someone else's opinion, it makes a lot of sense that the format could open up, right, whenever it wants to. It's just a matter of when is it ready to kind of make that jump, I guess.
the purpose to me of this podcast episode is for people to take this moment of the podcast or the TikTok that you eventually clip to put on our TikTok account, to send to their friend who's like, hey, Modern can't brew in it. You got to just play the best deck. Your deck idea is dumb. Send this to them. You're wrong. Modern is dope. You can come up with new strategies in
Yep.
it. I'm the host of the Masters of Modern podcast. You don't know what you're talking about. This format is super wide open, and get good, scrub. There we go.
The Modern format has been my favorite format for quite some time. It has been something that I started playing when it at its inception. I mean, I was playing Black Red Vampires with Vampire Nocturnus and Terminates, right? So it's like and then I went to like this green white Kitchen Finks deck. What's the name of that green white creature? The Lord, the 4 mana hybrid, +1/+1 for each green one, for each green creature, +1/+1 for each white creature.
I don't even know.
Yeah, but that
cut.
I was trying to brew into that, right? So I mean, for a long time, I've always wanted to brew, right? I've always wanted to do something fun for the format, but in all honesty, the format is always fun regardless. I think it's by far, in my opinion, the most fun I have outside of maybe playing Commander with your buddies, right? But outside of that, I think it's definitely something that is always open to interpretation, which I think Modern, that's what Modern should be, right? So
Sure.
Hopefully there's more people listening to the podcast that'll take this and say, hey, let's make something fun. Let's try to brew something. And you never know, maybe you are going to be the next Lantern Control, right? It could happen.
And you bring up vampires, and I do think that's the easiest strategy to just randomly be good now, which is tribal decks, right? Like that happened with humans, that happened it's happening with elementals,
Mm-hmm.
it happened with spirits, it could happen with vampires. There could just be a good vampire list out there that people haven't figured out. There's obviously goblins, elves, and merfolk all have decks that are 5-0ing regularly to some extent. Elves being the weakest of those three, mostly due to its weakness to Fury. But even then, like these decks are viable, and like there's a ton of Wizards could very easily, especially after the Brothers War, get a massive shot in the arm to be viable. There's that new blue-red Wizard that was printed that whenever you play a non-creature spell, all creatures get +1/+0.
Yeah.
There's a ton of different strategies out there. We've always said, if you're going to come up with a tribal deck, look at the ones that exist and figure out, why is this different than those? Why would a vampire deck be better than Merfolk? And right now, a lot of the vampire cards don't really lean into that, but zombies, vampires both have the ability to play out of the graveyard with a Bloodghast strategy or a Gravecrawler strategy. They have the aristocrats features to them with vampires. If they print the right vampire aristocrat that's both good for aristocrat strategy as well as good, as a threat in Modern, maybe you're looking at something. Maybe that's something that's different than what's viable. So I think that there's so many different cards that could be printed to make strategies viable. There's so many different strategies that are on the verge of being viable that sometimes it's just the right tech. Sometimes strategies are just you're trying too hard. And this is what happened with with Death Shadow I mentioned earlier, you're trying too hard to like be cute. And if you were just to take the core of the strategy that's doing well and just focus on that instead of the cute side of it, you've taken a deck from I'm going to, not tournament viable or tier 3 to tier 1.
Yeah.
That's what happened there. Another example was Birthing Pod. Before Birthing Pod was banned, it had moved almost entirely away from not Kiki Jiki, or well, Kiki Jiki combo as well as Kitchen Fink combo. Like you were not doing Malira combo anymore, and you were no longer doing the Kiki Jiki combo. You were just a Siege Rhino deck that had Birthing Pod in it because it could find any silver bullet you had for strategies for hate bears, and then otherwise was one of the best value engines you could play, and decks couldn't beat Siege Rhino at the time. So I think like there's always a opening to take some strategies and make them a little bit more viable by making them a little less targeted and a little bit more broad in its ability to handle threats. I think there are strategies that get a new piece that make them stronger, and I think there's strategies that are on the edge of playable and the metagame needs to shift in their favor, or just the right card combo isn't being thought of. You're not thinking of Amulet plus Summer Bloom.
Yeah.
And you could be.
Yeah.
Or you're not thinking you're trying to do Goryo's Vengeance with Grizzlebrand when you should be doing Grizzlebrand and be using Goryo's Vengeance with Grizzlebrand, but like using Shoals to gain, a terrible green bulk rare from Kamigawa is actually the secret to you drawing your entire deck and winning the game with a Bergamos in play. So like big, and that's a deck, for instance, that's maybe viable, right? Like at any moment, that deck could just be good. Faithless Looting's been banned, but they've now printed a bunch of good control red discard spells, and Grizzlebrand can come back tomorrow if the right combo of cards or the right metagame works for it.
I will go on the record and say at my next RCQ in my LGS for Modern, I will play Black White Zombies. That is going to be something that I will break the format with Black White Zombies. That is
I believe in you.
My goal. That is my goal, Alex, and I will get there.
I'm hopeful. I mean, like I obviously want that to happen. I want people to succeed in Modern. And that does bring us to kind of the next point. I think like, if I were to pick the 3 things as a barrier to people brewing in Modern, it's not stagnation.
Sure.
I don't think the format's stagnating. I don't think most of the cards for Modern Horizon, though obviously warping the format, are not stopping new deck ideas from working.
Sure.
I think the things that are hurting it are hyper release schedule. I think just there's so many new cards coming out that it's hard to even find what good cards are in those sets quick enough before the metagame shifts entirely because a new set came out, which we brought up. 2, I do think there's a little bit of just like bad attitude. And maybe kind of an answer to that. And then is the like paper Magic coming back versus online Magic and what those metagame shifts look like is a part of that bad attitude. And then the third one, I do agree with this, which is that, before COVID, there was a Modern season from basically the May set release to the September set release, or May set release to the core set. You would have 3 to 6 months of Modern PTQs. Every PTQ would be Modern. It would be feeding into a Modern Pro Tour later that year, and it would launch with a 4 Grand Prix series of Modern focused Grand Prix. And then there was a standard season, and then there was a limited season, and then at one point there was also a block constructed season. Now I would argue probably Modern, Pioneer, Standard, and Sealed. I think we need to bring that back. Like I think the point that Nosferatu at MTG Nosferatu, speaking of vampires, made is because so much of the formats are shuffled all year long, where at any moment you need to be good at alchemy, historic, standard, explorer, pioneer, standard, modern, and maybe to a lesser extent legacy. That's so many different formats and you have to know them every week, right? If you're doing RCQs in your area, every RCQ, and limited would be the last one. Every RCQ is going to be a different format that you have to master And if that's how it's working, then I have no motivation to brew. I have my one modern deck that is a tier 1 modern deck because I'm grinding RCQs. I have my one pioneer deck that's the top 5 pioneer decks on the list. I have my one historic deck, my one, like, all those are just what's the best deck I can find that's within my genre of playing Magic that I know I'm good at. I don't have to do aggro, so there's no counting
Yeah, sure.
or whatever. And then now I lazily play through those RCQs because it's impossible for me to come up with new ideas when I have to look at 17 different formats at a moment versus focusing on one format at a time.
That's kind of what
And
Reduke was saying. We're going back to the beginning of the episode. That's exactly what he said. He had said, "I wish," not verbatim, right? But he essentially said, "I wish I can brew more, but I'm so focused on other formats besides modern that I don't have time to brew." Right. So I think going back to the schedule that was once had before, I think would be an amazing way to kind of get people to want to brew, right? Because, for example, the regional this year coming up, where I think I already went through, was Pioneer, but my RCQ at my store was Modern, and then I had another one that was Pioneer, or I think it was Modern as well. There was 2 or 3 RCQs in my area, and most of them were Modern. I was like, but I had to prepare for Pioneer, right? So I think that also, like you said, I definitely agree with you. I think more than likely kind of getting to a schedule that kind of gets people excited for a specific format for months at a time gives us an opportunity to possibly find the next Lantern Control, the next Black White Zombies, right? Like something along the lines of that, to find something that'll kind of help the format kind of not adjust, right? But kind of have something like, oh, I can do this,
right.
and not have to worry about it, and play
And some of
something
that
for
takes
fun.
reiteration, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
if I'm brewing in paper, I need to go to 5 RCQs to be
Mm-hmm.
able to have enough tournament data from the first one to then, okay, these 4 cards didn't work. That sideboard card was bad. This deck matchup is terrible, but this matchup was so good
Yep.
that I know that this is the type of strategy I want to be paired against. I need
Yep.
to have my sideboard and I had oh, my Tron matchup, cakewalk. My white black zombies deck just takes Tron out, no problem.
Uh-huh.
But in my sideboard, I had a bunch of Tron sideboard hate, and my affinity matchup is terrible, and I had no one artifact removal spell in
Yeah.
my entire deck. So
Yeah.
and so then the next week you adjust it, and then that week, okay, the bringing the artifact did make it so my affinity matchup worked, but I was actually still weak to graveyard hate, even with the good graveyard hate I brought, and therefore maybe the fact that I had 6 cards of graveyard hate in my deck and then still lost a graveyard, I should just ignore graveyard strategies and just hope I don't get paired against them. And that way I can increase my chances against these 7 strategies by having, more sideboard slots for those, the matchups I can win. Then I have the matchups that I stomp on without needing sideboard cards, and my total losses, I shouldn't even try. I just hope I win on the draw. I
Sure.
get the draw on the first round, and then they stumble.
Yeah.
And that's week 2. Then week 3, you play against those matchups. You learn oh, actually, this one pet card, I finally drew it. It's terrible. I'm cutting it. Oh, this other card that I saw tech on the internet for someone that else is also brewing, ends up that's really good in my deck also. I'm going to play 4 of those. And then you try that the next week, and then that really works. And you're like, oh, wait, Noble Hierarch is really good in this zombie deck, but so I'm going to be, Abzan zombies now. I guess I
Yeah.
should also play Gavin Township. Now I can play Knight of the Reliquary.
Yeah.
Et
It
cetera, et
all comes
cetera, et
back to
cetera.
not of the reliquary.
So you need that
Sure.
process. And some of that you can do on Moto, right? That's part of
Sure.
how Moto helps function here. But that reiteration process, especially as a paper Magic player who doesn't have a Moto account, without those features and focus for a season, you're not going to be able to come up with new ideas. And especially if I'm trying to RCQ grind, going to go to everyone in my area. This week I have to know about Modern. Next week I need to know about Pioneer. Okay, well, what's good in Pioneer? I guess I'll play just the best deck because that's going to be, we've always kind of proposed on this podcast that it's better to be a master at your deck than
Yep.
to be playing the best deck
Absolutely agree.
and
Yeah.
new to it. Obviously, it's
Yes.
best to be a master of the best deck,
Yes.
but that
Yes.
isn't always possible.
Yeah, it doesn't always work that way. I played Blue Red Tempo, and I'm just like, give me Primeval Titan. This is
how do I do this? How do I? Yeah,
this. Just give me this. I know, and there's more lines in this one, but I understand it because I've been playing it for so long, sort of thing. Yeah.
And with that in mind, like, if you're jumping between 4 different formats a week, it's hard to get good at a deck. You're now having to figure it out. I mean, there's an argument maybe to just play Phoenix in every format, especially if Dredge is good. Yeah. And then you can just that's the other answer, right? Is just play the same strategy over all 5 of the formats.
Yeah, cards that lend itself, right? Cards that are available in formats, right? Like you said, Arclight Phoenix being viable in Pioneer. Well, let me shift over. Let me pull these 15 cards and pull out these 15 cards because I'm playing Modern tomorrow, right? And then you put those together. But at least you still have the shell of what Arclight Phoenix is supposed to be. The core shell of what it is. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely agree. I think, absolutely. I think that being able to have a consistent grind, whether or not you're playing for fun or you want to grind it out, whatever it might be, I think that Magic kind of lends itself to the ability to do what you want. And if possibly Wizards in some way, shape, or form can kind of keep more of a consistent schedule, and the idea is like, hey, we're going to have these things at this point in time, that'll give me more, that'll give me leeway to be like, okay, now I can actually do this. Right? I'm just reiterating what I said earlier, but I mean, it's definitely the best way to do it.
Of an essay. It's the hardest part in high school for me because it was always just repeat what you said already in a way that's slightly different.
I cannot do that. When I graduated college, that was Shay would always say, just summarize what you just said. I said, I just did in this entire essay. What do you mean I have to reiterate it? And you're not supposed to end it with in conclusion. It's like, well, then I can't do this.
Yeah. So in conclusion, you can brew in Modern. Yes. Modern's dope. The metagame isn't solved. Wizards of the Coast, please reunify the season so that we have a seasonal Magic experience. Yes. And Arena can be different than Paper. I don't need those to be aligned, though I do think that when Explorer is legal as a season, Pioneer maybe should be the matching season, and Standard could be, but maybe it's Historic and Modern are the season together, right? You have 3 formats for each. You have 3 seasons a year.
Yes.
Please figure that out.
Yes. And we also would like a 10-page paper on how to write a conclusion and send that to the
homework.
Yes. And send that to the MMcastNetwork@gmail.com.
In the comments below, we request you write our conclusion for us for this podcast. And you're not allowed to use the words in conclusion at the beginning.
Or furthermore. You cannot write furthermore either.
Yeah.
You cannot do that.
Yes. Those two words are banned. I'm hoping one time I'll see if I can maybe it's on Facebook. I once wrote a conclusion that was just me repeating the word conclusion again and again and again for a class once, and I got an A on that paper.
Oh, right on.
Yeah. But it was like a joke paper. So, but there we go. Once again, Rene, thank you so much. We'll love to have you on again. I also want to do an episode maybe talking about all of the different flavors of Primeval Titan decks in Modern. So look forward to Rene's return to do some Primeval Titan content. And then make sure to follow out the new MMcast TikTok account. It's the MMcast podcast, right?
The MM podcast.
The MM podcast.
Yes. So everywhere else is the MMcast, and then on TikTok is the MM podcast.
So make sure to follow us there. There's a bunch of new content.
And drop us a line. It's it's either Alex or I that's going to be more than likely responding to you guys. So it'd be fun to say hi. But thanks again, guys. I really appreciate having me on it.
Remember, we've gone from like 300 followers to almost 1,000. So keep hanging out with us.
Yes. And thank you very much for having me on here.
Kess Wiley TikTok account, 2 different TikTok accounts.
Yes,
almost exclusively Magic content. You don't have to hear about me talking about One Piece or any of the other random things that shoot into my head. It's the MMcast one's all Magic all the time.
Yes.
All right. Thank you once again, Rene. Thank you to our sponsors. Make sure if you're going to MTG Summit and you're checking out, use the KESS code. If you're going to Channel Fireball RCG, use the links below with the codes. And then make sure to check out ultrasleeves.com. Also follow Rene. There's links below.
Oh, yes.
And we'll talk to all of you next week.
Thanks, guys.
This has been a production of Time Traveler Media, sending podcasts into the future.